Funding for Amish cooking from Quilt Country with Marcia Adams was provided by
Sauter Woodworking, America's furniture craftsman.
And by Marilat Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality and a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles.
Hi there. Welcome to Amish Cooking from Quilt Country. Today we're going to do summer desserts. All the recipes use spices found in every Amish kitchen. And these desserts can also be made during the winter months with frozen or canned fruits. Surely, of all the recipes that the Amish prepare, they're most famous for their desserts, and rightfully so. Our first recipe is old-fashioned strawberry shortcake. Now, like all these old recipes that come from the 19th century, I've updated them for today's kitchen. So we're going to do the shortcake biscuit in a food processor. And in your food processor bowl, place 1 3/4 cup of flour. And to that, add 1/4 cup of cornstarch, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, and a teaspoon of salt. And every time you see cornstarch in one of these old recipes, you can trust that you're going to end up with a very smooth product, almost like a cake, even though traditionally this is a biscuit. Now just pulse this once to mix. And to this, add 6 tablespoons of cold butter. And I really do prefer butter for this because it will give a lot of flakiness to this. Now, I am going to use, of course, the processor again to make coarse crumbs, but the Amish would probably use a pastry blender like this, or they'd use 2 knives. And of course, you do get a very good product that way, too. You want something that looks like coarse pastry crumbs. That's what it looks like. Now, to this, add 3/4 to 1 cup of milk. And the amount you add is really going to depend on the moisture that's in your flour and the moisture that's in the air. If it's a humid day, you might not need as much as you ordinarily would. I've already got a stiff dough, and you see I've only used a 3/4 cup of this milk. Now transfer this to a 9-inch pie tin. And this is a good stiff dough. Already you see the liquid is beginning to react with the cornstarch. People say to me now and then, Amish cooking is like shaker cooking, isn't it? But really, it isn't. It's quite different. The shaker cookery came out of an English tradition and has a lot of emphasis on herbs. The Amish use relatively few herbs, and primarily their recipes came out of a Middle European cooking tradition. Both cuisines, however, are rich and generous, with a great emphasis on cream and butter. Now, bake this at least 20 to 25 minutes in a 375-degree oven. Then, after it's baked, this is what it looks like. Isn't this gorgeous? And you will need at least 6 to 8 cups of sweetened strawberries on this. Now, in the Midwest, there are 3 kinds of cake that are used for shortcake. And there will be an angel food cake, which is very nice, or there will be a yellow sponge cake. But most of us, including me, prefer this great biscuit cake. But no matter which cake you use, it is one of the most sublime of summer desserts. Traditionally, deep dish pies have only one top crust, but lots and lots of food underneath, and that's what makes it good. This next dish has a crispy, slightly sweet pastry, and the cherry filling is rich with brown sugar. The pie can be made with either the fresh or the frozen fruit. In the bowl, I have 4 cups of pitted cherries, and to that, we're going to add a 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, a 1/2 cup of brown sugar, and the thickening is 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. Now, you could use flour if you like, but that would make sort of a murky filling, so we're going to use cornstarch. And then add 1 teaspoon about of almond extract. Almond is a very nice flavoring to use with cherries as well as peaches. And then you can add just a tiny, tiny bit of red food coloring. You don't need much. And then toss this together and set it aside. And this same recipe could be used with fresh peaches, for instance, or blackberries, or raspberries, any of those delicious summer fruits that are available to you. I would not try it with gooseberries. You need a fruit that's a little juicier than the gooseberries would be. But oh, this is going to be just great. Just great. Now mix this thoroughly and set it aside, and that gives the cornstarch a chance to sort of dissolve properly. And then transfer it to a greased deep dish. Remember, this is a deep dish cherry pie. I can smell the almond. Spread this out. And now we're going to make a lovely biscuit dough to go on top. And in the mixer bowl, I already have creamed 1/2 cup of lard plus 2 tablespoons of lard and a tablespoon of granulated sugar and 1/2 teaspoon each of nutmeg and salt. And it's nicely creamed and soft. You know, people question my occasional use of lard in these recipes. It was important to me as a food historian to have recorded these recipes accurately. But if you want to change the recipes and use substitutes, such as oleomargarine, please do so. But really, for the sake of authenticity, I'm presenting them to you just the way the Amish women gave them to me. And I do think, actually, that some of the recipes are better using lard. I'm going to take out the paddle here. Ooh, got your attention, didn't I? And to this, we're going to alternately add 1/2 cup plus, 1.5 cups of flour, alternately with 1/3 cup of ice water. When you see that listed in a recipe, you always begin with the flour. So add about 1/3 of that. The Amish man uses up approximately 4,000 calories a day because he's working without any electricity, and of course he uses horses. And an Amish woman will use up approximately 2,500 calories to 3,000. So you really see that these people can get by eating these delicious desserts and still not be terribly overweight. Lucky Amish. Yeah. Sweet cherries, sour, black, red, and especially wild cherries. The Pennsylvania Dutch loved them all. And they dried them just like they dried apples so they could use them all winter long. You know, we think that dried cherries are something new. And during the last couple of years, the food writers have tried to emphasize that this is a trendy new dish. But actually, dried cherries have been around for a couple of 100 years, just as dried apples have been. And I have some here to show you. These are the dried cherries. This is really a great product. They have a more sprightly flavor than raisins, and I use them like raisins. They're delicious in rice pudding or for stuffing pork chops. And of course, these are the dried apples, and these are often used for fried pies. It's opened up a whole new market for the cherry growers in Michigan. And if you can find them, they're fun to work with. Now, you would roll out this dough to fit the top of your dish, and you want it slightly larger. And don't forget to dot the top of this with 1/3 cup of butter, and that's also going to help a very nice crust texture, because it's going to be very short. That's the word we say in flavor and texture. Got a good short crust here. And then transfer this right to the top. Now, you can finish this up a number of ways. We could be very floury, if you like, and do some flowers cut out of pastry or some more of this dough. But I'll show you how the Amish will do it. They would probably just slash it because you want to let the steam escape. I'm going to do the design that's called Tree of Life. And this is the trunk, and these are the branches. Of course, this is very stylized. The history is long gone in the mist of memory. Nobody really knows where they came from. But if I had slashed, these stories came from, but if I had slashed this with 3 slashes like this, that would have stood for the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Now, we bake this at 325 for 1 hour. Ooh, and here's a delicious one bubbling away. And this one is very elegantly decorated, and very appropriately so, with cherries. Cherry pie is a traditional 4th of July dessert, but I hope you won't wait till then to try this juicy, tempting dish. The next dessert is put together in a rather different fashion. Layers of crumbs alternating with layers of peaches, and then a mixture of hot water and sugar is poured over the top. Sounds yummy, doesn't it? It's a very old-fashioned way to use up peaches, and the results are positively wonderful. Begin here with a cup of flour, and to it we're going to add 1 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder, a teaspoon of nutmeg, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And quickly blend that together. In the mixer bowl, cream 2 tablespoons of butter and a 1/2 cup of sugar. Now, ordinarily, I would cream this for 3 minutes, and that's a very good rule to use. If you cream butter and sugar together for 3 minutes, that means you're going to have a thoroughly integrated product, and you've added a lot of air, which you need because that helps the dough rise. And then we're going to add this flour mixture to this. What you're making here, you see, are the cake crumbs. And you would mix that a couple of minutes, I would say. Now we're going to alternate cake crumbs with peaches and use 3 or 4 peaches, it depends on the size. And get this mixture here ready to go so I don't forget it. It's a 1/2 cup of brown sugar and a 1/2 cup of white sugar. Layer 1/2 of the peaches in the bottom, and then we're going to layer 1/2 of the cake crumbs and repeat. When the Germans arrived in Pennsylvania, they found both wild and cultivated orchards of peaches. That was a nice surprise. The early Dutch settlers, plus the Swedish settlers along the Delaware River, had planted lots of them. So peaches were plentiful. In fact, they were so plentiful that they fed excess peaches to the pigs. But they eventually found a much better use for them. They made peach brandy. Peach brandy was used a lot by the early Pennsylvania Dutch cooks, but that custom was one that the Amish and the Mennonites did not pick up. Now, over the top, sprinkle this combined mixture of a 1/2 cup of brown and a 1/2 cup of white sugar. Don't mix it in, because after this is baked, this sugar remains on top and makes this crackly crust. I have tried making this with apples, and I don't think it's as successful as it is with peaches. There's something about the peaches having a higher water content than the apples do. Now, over the top, we're going to pour 1 cup of hot water and a teaspoon of almond extract. And again, don't mix this in. Isn't this a weird dish? Works. You're going to be very impressed with the end result. Bake this at 350 for 1 hour. Put a little more nutmeg on top if you really like nutmeg. This looks like a simple country dish, but it's truly celestial. I'll give it that nice adjective. Serve this with cream or with ice cream. This next dish is the quintessence of American country desserts. Can you guess what it is? It's old-fashioned apple dumplings, and still one of the very best apple desserts ever created. Whole apples are wrapped in pastry and then baked in a clear sugar sauce. It's served regularly on Hoosier tables, and mine too. I am a Hoosier. Why would I not do this great dessert? Begin by rolling out a rectangle of pie pastry 14 inches by 21 inches. This is equivalent to approximately 2 9-inch pie crusts with their lids. There's enough dough there for 6 dumplings, but today we're only going to do 2. We can have another pie after the show is over. A very generous one, wouldn't you say? The apples that we use are important. Of course, the most readily available apples to us would be Yellow Delicious or Granny Smith. And in either case, they should be first dipped into lemon juice for added tartness. I think Yellow Delicious always needs lemon juice. So if you use this in pie or cobblers, by all means, always add lemon juice. and then roll it thoroughly, because that's where you're going to get some good flavor, in a half a cup of granulated sugar and a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then we're going to stuff that with a mixture of brown sugar and butter. It's getting better all the time, isn't it? Sometimes you can get really fancy and stuff it with macaroons. Okay. If you have access to the apple that's called Northern Spy, use those. The amount of sugar and butter that you put in the apple depends totally on the cavity. And you want to start out with the brown sugar and then add a bit of butter and then more brown sugar. Oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be good. You know what? You could put some of those dried cherries in here. That would be interesting. Northern Spies that I mentioned earlier fall into the antique apple classification. And I'm happy to report to you that there is a renewed interest in these old apple varieties. Now see, I'm just pressing this up here, just encasing it very sort of in a lackadaisical fashion. You could crimp it elegantly if you like. There's a renewed interest in these old apples that were grown before the Civil War. They have great names like Black Gillyflower, Winter Pearmaid, Spitzenberg, St. Edward's Pippin, but let me warn you, they're not as beautiful looking as their names sound. The fruit is small and irregular, just plain quirky in fact. And it was that quirky, eccentric appearance that nearly led to their demise. Because today, people have chosen style over substance, and they want perfect, beautiful apples. But because of their sprightly flavors and almost winey bouquet, apple enthusiasts are raising some of these old-fashioned antique apple trees in their own gardens, or they're driving many miles to buy them at out-of-the-way fruit stands. Now, to finish this up, we're going to do a sugar sauce. And I'll have to admit that I think the Midwest, that's not gorgeous, it's going to taste gorgeous. I think that the Midwest is sort of a sugar-based belt, a sugar-based cuisine. We put sugar sauces on anything from ham loaf to dumplings. We do not, I'm glad to report, put it on filet mignon. But the sugar sauce we're going to do today is just a simple one, and I'm sure you do this at home. You want 2 cups of water, 3/4 cups of sugar, and 2 tablespoons of margarine or butter, a little splash here of vanilla, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of mace, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. And boil that hard for 1 minute, and then let it cool a bit. I have one fixed already. And then you want to pour that sugar sauce over these dumplings. These can also be frozen at this point. By that I mean you could freeze them before you put the sauce over them. So if you have excess apples, that's a good way to use them up. Now, bake this at 375 for 1 hour. This is a very nostalgic dessert, and it transports us back to Sunday dinners at grandmother's house. The nice thing about it is that you can duplicate it in your own kitchen today. Apple dumplings aren't the only nostalgic thing I want to discuss. I also want to talk about dolls. Doll making has become a rather large and important industry in Amish country. It's partly because they're made by hand, and it's partly because they have no faces. As you know, the Amish are a church community of very conservative Christians whose members are committed to simple and austere living. They believe that their lifestyle must embody their faith, and they use the New Testament as their guide. All of their patterned behavior is based on the Bible and their religious beliefs. The dolls that you find for sale in Amish communities come in several styles, and the style depends totally on the pattern that the doll maker uses. However, the techniques used from maker to maker are quite the same. Most doll makers create several dolls at one time, cutting the clothes for the doll as well as the body. An English person uses an electric machine. Of course, the Amish woman will use a foot pedal sewing machine. The body is assembled in stages. The parts of the dolls are stuffed using a doll stick and polyfiber fill. The doll will be faceless because of the Bible verse, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image." It was astonishing to see how much polyfiber fill it takes to complete a doll, a whole half-pound. The finishing is done by hand. The dolls are quite labor-intensive. Pauline's version of the faceless doll includes its own quilt. Sometimes Amish children mischievously paint faces on their dolls. We saw other interpretations of Amish dolls when we visited Rebecca Haar. Rebecca is an Amish folklorist and collects Amish antique dolls and lives in this newly constructed house, which includes timbers and woodwork from a home built in the 1800s. Rebecca, this is an enchanting collection of antique Amish dolls, and I have not seen such small ones before. They're just dear.
These tiny dolls are really church dolls, and longer ago, especially, they were taken to church by the little girls.
And they were permitted to play with the dolls during the church
Yes.
service, which incidentally lasts about 3 hours, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Now, these dolls look quite different to me than the commercial dolls that I see made in various shops. They appear flatter.
Well, the reason for that is that they are truly rag dolls. They are stuffed with old pieces of clothing instead of the contemporary polyfill. And that was the way dolls were made at this time.
What era would this have been approximately?
Well, the doll that I'm holding in my hand is approximately 65 years old. And many of these dolls are from that time period, 1910 to 1940.
Now, this is a newer doll, and she's obviously patterned after these antique dolls of yours. Where did you find her?
Well, because I'm interested in folklore and in the old patterns that have come forward in our community, I am always on the lookout for these things. This particular doll came from an Amish woman near Shipshewana who is a doll maker. And I showed her the doll that I'm holding and suggested to her that her doll and this doll are similar. So she then took some of the features from the old doll and added it to her pattern.
I want to turn this doll around and show her bonnet, because you can see that it's stitched in the back, almost like pleats, and then has this long neck curtain. And this was the way the dolls looked
Right.
at that time, and that's the way this doll is that correct?
This is the style of bonnet that was worn by Amish women at that time. And even today in the community, occasionally you'll see a very old grandmother still wearing this style of bonnet.
I couldn't resist this doll of Rebecca's. She named her Lydia in honor of the first Amish doll maker she'd ever met. That Amish doll maker is now 100 years old. I think she flourished on desserts like these that we made today. This Lydia now lives at my house. Let's take a look at what we've created. Absolutely irresistible strawberry shortcake, the essence of the month of June. Luscious deep dish cherry pie, a favorite at 4th of July picnics, good any time of the year. Peach cobbler combined in a rather different way, but the end results are heavenly. That sugar crackles on the top when you break into it. And old-fashioned apple dumplings that evoke memories of grandmother's house. And the quilt we have today also reminds me of grandmother's house. The maker is unknown, but we do know that she's from Elkhart, Indiana, or was from Elkhart, Indiana. And we know that the quilt was made between 1880 and 1900. This is a real antique in very good condition, and it's valued at $5,000. It's made with some very muted fabrics, plus some colors like this lime green, not generally associated with the Amish. Frequently, the Amish women sewed for the English as dressmakers, and the leftover scraps would appear in their quilts. The fan is really a Midwest pattern that the Amish borrowed from their English neighbors, but the design makes it very appropriate for all of these rural farm women to use. It resembles part of a windmill or even the spokes of a buggy wheel. This quilt also has, as you can see here, embroidery on it. This is called surface embellishment. Wouldn't this quilt look absolutely fantastic hung on a wall? So until next time, ess a gut, eat good.
All recipes seen in this series are available in Marcia Adams' book, Cooking from Quilt Country. This hardcover contains nearly 200 Amish and Mennonite recipes with color photographs and descriptions of the food and folkways of America's heartland. The cost of the book is $24.95 plus handling. Please have your credit card ready when you call 1-800-325-2667. Series 2 of Amish Cooking from Quilt Country is available on home video for $59.95 plus shipping. All 13 programs in this second series are compiled on 3 VHS cassettes. Call 1-800-325-2667 for credit card orders.